talk about Jeremy Corbyn's annual Happy Hanukkah message to Jews in Britain. I mean, it's obviously a big attempt. Did it go down well, do you think?
I think he had to do it, and I think he's got to build huge... Well, he's not going to be the leader of the Labour Party for much longer, but he needs to build bridges, because when you get the chief rabbi, no less, a faith leader, intervening in a general election campaign, it's never happened before, an explosive intervention, saying the man wasn't fit to be Prime Minister, effectively. A number of Labour MPs quit the party because of anti-Semitism.
Yeah.
Luciana Berger, for instance. And so there's a real problem there. There's an ongoing investigation by the Equalities and Human Rights Commission. But I think Jeremy Corbyn should have gone to see the chief rabbi the moment that all blew up. And he hasn't seen him yet.
I mean, funny enough, we saw, didn't we, Gary Neville talking very politically on Sky following the Tottenham match and the allegations of horrific racism and language use. I mean, just awful. And also over the weekend, Stormzy did an interview with an Italian newspaper where he said that he's still very concerned. He was talking, obviously, to Italian readers. And it feels like, what Gary Neville said, that he was calling politicians like Jeremy Corbyn, also he mentioned Boris Johnson, to take more responsibility for the hearts and minds of racism. Not saying that they are racist, but in the language they use and their behaviour, they have to be very careful if we're ever going to really change people's minds.
Well, absolutely, but the language that politicians use when they're at the dispatch box, when they're out campaigning, when they're trying to do a short-term political win to get elected in that election that we just had, that stuff filters down. People take their cues from it. And now that they can sort of go, you can go on the internet and you can spout off whatever you want. This stuff, I almost feel a tiny bit heartened that we're seeing clips of Gary Neville going viral on the internet, that we're seeing Stormzy getting the platform he has, because at least people are now able, with authoritative voices, to confront some of this. And if we kid ourselves that Britain doesn't have an issue with race in 2019, then we're just lying to ourselves.
Yeah, and Boris Johnson has to be very careful too as the Prime Minister, because his remarks about women wearing burqas looking like letterboxes was meant to be funny, but it wasn't very funny, even though the article in which he wrote it, he was defending the right of women to wear burqas, saying he didn't support
That's the sort of language
bans.
that people object to, isn't it? It's like he says, I'm in the cause of this, but he's harnessing offensive language, and of course he was doing it as a
in that article,
Prime Minister.
In that article, he may well have intention was to defend women to wear what they like, but he knows the language he's using.
He's a wordsmith.
And he's in The Spectator. He knows what crowd he's playing to. It's a deliberate attempt, and that sort of quite clever, what is supposedly clever tactic, is quite reckless. And also, let's not forget, everyone talks about this burqa column, but as a British Muslim, I remember when Boris Johnson, after 2007, said Islam was the problem. He's on record saying Islam is a problem. Muslims have not forgotten about that. And I think the problem we get to, and the same with Jeremy Corbyn, is that they get caught out. There is this history of anti-Semitism and Islamophobia, but nothing is done about it, other than going, well, it was a long time ago, we will do an investigation, we will have an inquiry.
Well, I spoke to...
It's just not right.
I spoke on LBC, my radio show, the other day, to a guy who lost his seat from the Labour Party. He was the guy who was kicked out, not kicked out, he resigned from the Labour Party in Derby North, Chris Williamson, who said the witch hunt against people in the Labour Party about anti-Semitism was bogus. There's no problem with anti-Semitism in the Labour Party. I said, hang on, what about these Labour MPs who quit? Like Luciana Berger said, it's made up, it was just an attempt to undermine Jeremy Corbyn. So there is great denial still going on.
Oh, come on, Chris Williamson, you can't take Chris Williamson as a representative of the Labour Party. Well, there's a much bigger issue, and you just keep going to it, which is that the Conservatives have not had their own reckoning with Islamophobia within the party.
They've set up the investigation in the last few days, actually.
Have they?
Yeah, they have.
But is it an Islamophobia investigation, or is it one about all discrimination?
From what I remember, because it got hardly any coverage, but that's partly because the anti-Semitism issue was much more dominant than the Islamophobia problem.
That's because the media has covered it in that respect.
No, it's because, Jim, because the problem with anti-Semitism is right in Jeremy Corbyn's private office, and it was to do with the way his office conducted the inquiry into anti-Semitism. And, hang on just a second, the Equalities and Human Rights Commission is investigating that. They're not investigating the Tory party.
And Labour are the only party other than the BNP who've had that official investigation.
It's beyond vile what's been going on in that party,
and
it's not a matter of equivalence, but
No.
the fact that we aren't really talking about the wider societal issues as well.
But is this a problem with politics? Politicians should be there to unite the country.
They should.
We are an increasingly growing, diverse nation, and proud of that. We always have been, with many different religions, faiths, genders, and all different types of people. It is their duty to unify us. However, the political system means that they've got a better chance of getting into power by dividing us, by appealing to a certain demographic and picking on their vulnerabilities and scaremongering. And that's a problem with politics as a whole, is it? And that's never going to change, is it, really?
I don't really see any way back. And I think there's a point that we made just there about the way that the Prime Minister, in his journalism, we can dismiss that as, oh, he was sort of trying to be entertaining, he was playing around with an idea, he was coming up with a witty turn of phrase to describe something, and, oh, he's apologised and he didn't really mean it anyway. Imagine if Stormzy had made some of the comments in reverse that Boris Johnson has made.
OK, well, that's an interesting point, then, because people are allowed to have pass before they, become politicians. We would like to
Boris Johnson was an MP when he was making these comments.
I know, but what I know, but what I mean is that we know that Boris Johnson is a colourful character. So what does he do now? Because he's done that. Does he come out in the way that people are calling for Jeremy Corbyn to tackle anti-Semitism in Labour? Does he come out, and how does he distance himself properly so we believe that his intent of those columns was not to, appeal to the worst bits of society?
Yeah.
If it really was his intention to kind of, highlight the problems and not just play to the worst possible crowd, what should he do?
Well, I think you're doing a very good faith interpretation of it there to a certain extent. You're assuming that that's what he was.
Tried to be impartial.
Just joying. He was just playing around with it. The thing that I just really want us to keep coming back to is the difference between the treatment of someone like Stormzy, who is a very thoughtful person who has spoken about the issue of race in Britain, and just the way that he then gets his words used in headlines over the weekend is just extraordinary. He said that he thought that Britain is 100% yes, in the sense of yes, it is a racist country to an extent, and then immediately that becomes a headline all over the shop of Britain is 100% racist. This is the sort of thing that he is complaining about in a message.
But look, I mean, we're reacting to little moments of when a politician may say something that's Islamophobic or anti-Semitic. It's more than that. It's about politicians being proactive. Now, Boris Johnson on his campaign trail was talking about he's fed up of foreign people coming over here and treating it like their own country. This general debate about immigration is where it all stems from. This idea that somehow we don't need immigration, and it sidelines Muslims, it sidelines black people, it sounds like new Eastern Europeans are arriving.
But equally, it can't be right that politicians can't discuss the levels of immigration without being accused of being racist.
Absolutely,
because that would be outrageous.
Absolutely, but there needs to be some responsibility.
Yeah.
If we heard that from a far-right politician in Europe, we'd be up in arms, going, my God, look what's happening over in Italy, look what's happening over in Eastern Europe. And this is our own Prime Minister.
But one of the mistakes that politicians have made for a long time is to ignore particularly working-class fears of immigration that's not about colour of skin or religion or race. It was actually about economics.
Yes.
For many people, I mean, people that... maybe we don't fit as much in London, but if you go outside, there are people that feel that their ability to earn a living by mass immigration, nothing to do with where people are from, has been affected. They may be right, they may be wrong, but that was something that politicians didn't tackle for a long time.
Well, I think that was part of the problem for the Labour Party about the referendum, because we know a lot of people outside of the big cities, one of the factors why they voted to get out of the EU, because they thought free movement, immigration to this country was too high.
Yeah.
And then they see Parliament, not just the Labour Party, Tories as well, blocking the referendum result, and that's why there was this great rage and anger outside of the metropolitan cities. And I think that contributed to Labour's defeat. They weren't listening.
Guy, I did also say earlier on that I think we all need to take responsibility. It's all well and good just blaming just politicians about race. We all, you look about the football instance. I always think about it. So they always talk about one or two football fans. No. What were the other fans around them doing at the time?
Absolutely.
But that's been going on. That's been going on.
And some of us from all backgrounds, and I'll say there are people in my own family. I'm not just saying this is about racism against people who are non-white. But when we're sat around dinner tables over Christmas, there might be an embarrassing uncle who might say something or somebody... But it's our duty to call that out now. You know, the world has changed, the time has changed, and there's no harm, with love, educating the people around us.
But, you know, you think football would have changed, but I can remember as a teenager going to Swindon Town Football Club. There was a player called Chris Kamara, who's now a very famous commentator, and
He's a friend of this show.
I'm sure he is. Banana skins thrown on the pitch.
that's
shocking.
Still
but now we hear
What did
Tottenham.
you think as a young boy?
Appalled by it.
Are you?
I was completely stunned,
Yeah.
and felt very protective towards this guy.
Did you say anything, or did the people you go on with your dad say anything?
Well, my dad said, you know, they're
horrible.
racist, son, but these were the away teams, so it was all bad. But I feared, did the Swindon fans do the same when they went away? I don't know. So then to hear that racist chanting at Tottenham match yesterday, disgraceful.
Yeah. OK.